Thanks for listening to Baxy's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to follow it, like it, rate it, share it all over the place. Remember, you can also listen to this podcast through the all-new Rock 102 app, which is available for iPhone and Android. And be sure to follow along on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Visit their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or head over to metrojeep.com and drive off in your new Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram today.
It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
When punk rock was invented about a bajillion years ago, its appeal was that you didn't have to be a virtuoso to begin kicking ass. You didn't need to be classically trained. You didn't need to come up with a bunch of complicated guitar solos. You didn't need to wear kimonos or capes or platform shoes. All you really needed was a defiant attitude and the ability to find one or two chords in a guitar, and you're pretty much all set to start ripping things up. Of course, nobody can really agree on what punk rock actually is or even when it started, but that hardly changes the point that I'm about to make. The primary reason that you start a band, any band, is because it's supposed to be fun. The more fun it is, the more you play. The more you play, the better you get. The better you get, the more likely it is that you'll begin to find your voice. Of course, that process differs for everybody. Some bands never actually find their voice, but others do. And in theory, that's when most people start to listen and take notice. For example, take a look at the band Hayley and the Crushers. This is a band that began on the central coast of California and eventually moved to Detroit, Michigan. A band that has been around for a number of years, playing infectious-sounding pop-flavored punk songs on each of their last 4 albums, from 2016's Jewel Case to Modern Adult Kicks, which was released in 2022. The band is about to release their latest record entitled Unsubscribed from the Underground, which is a 5-song EP, which, in my humble opinion, is the best thing they've ever done, which is saying quite a lot because I've really enjoyed everything else they've ever done. It's a band that has done their work. They appear to have found their voice, but most of all, the record is a whole lot of fun. And yes, people are starting to take notice and have already begun to hop aboard the Hayley and the Crushers bandwagon. In May of last year, I interviewed the legendary Josie Cotton, who had just released what I thought was the best album of her career, Day of the Gun. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it was Josie Cotton who signed Hayley and the Crushers to her own record label, Kitty Robot Records. Josie's last album was produced by Paul Ressler, the former keyboard player for the early LA punk band The Screamers. He's also the older brother of Kira Ressler, the former bass player for Black Flag. The reason I'm bringing that up is because Paul Ressler was involved in producing the new EP for Hayley and the Crushers. So while this is a band that seems to have found its voice, it's also a band that's being guided by some pretty prominent voices as well, and it's starting to pay off. To talk about that, the new EP, and a whole lot more is my interview with Hayley Crusher Cain, the lead singer of Hayley and the Crushers, on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
Oh, hello.
Good. Okay, we got it. Perfect. You know
Okay.
how it is when you send a Zoom invite, you just type
Oh, yeah.
it incredibly fast. That's exactly what I was doing.
100%. 100%.
Well,
Yeah, no worries.
I appreciate you
Thank you.
doing. I appreciate you doing this. This is I've had a chance to listen to the EP. I know it's not coming out for a little bit still, but I gotta tell you, I think it's the best stuff you guys have done yet. I really.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm sure you probably feel that when you're putting this stuff out, but it's not to say that your old stuff isn't great. It is, but it's just you guys have really stepped things up a notch, and I'm going to assume I'm probably not the first person to have told you that. Tell me about the new EP and how you're feeling about it.
Well, without going too far in the weeds, it's sort of a blend between we were signed to Kitten Robot Records, owned by Josie Cotton in 2021, I want to say. And through that partnership, we were able to go from this little garage band that was playing and recording in warehouses and little studios to this amazing studio in LA that was able to really open up our sound. And that's where Modern Adult Kicks came out of. But so since then we have moved to Detroit Plot twist. So this EP is sort of this blend, I feel like, of recording vocals in Los Angeles and having that experience that we had there at Kid Robot, but
Hmm.
also this we're kind of going back to a rawer sound, a more raw sound, and recording a lot of things in our lead guitar player's home recording studio, tracking drums there, and just kind of going with like the flow a little bit more, and like coming back to our punk rock kind of roots a little bit, even though we are such a retro fun band and we do a lot of things besides aggressive music, but
Right.
you know just kind of feeling like, oh, this is like a more authentic to who we are at this moment kind of thing. So I
Yeah.
think that's what people are hearing maybe, but I could not tell you.
Well, I mean, having never released music of my own, I mean, I have to believe, that when you know you've done something that's really, really good, there's got to be this period between finishing it and releasing it that's got to be excruciating, like like waiting for a child to be born. I mean, you are you in that mode now?
I love your questions. They're so wonderful. I think that for me as an artist, it's really the fun is in the creating and playing. Like I love that part. And then once I've done creating and playing with the Play-Doh, I'm almost like, yeah, I want it to come out, but that's like the most important thing that's the most fun for me is the making. And then when it comes out, there's all the anxiety of like, well, what are people gonna say? Blah, 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 and I don't try not to get too much into that, but I feel like I get so I think a lot of artists, they're in the moment when they're playing and they're recording and they're making and they're, creating demos. And that's where I find the most joy. So it's not like excruciating for me, no.
Because I've talked to some people that do kind of look at it as like giving birth, like you
Oh,
get the bag packed that sits there for 6 months before, so in case you have to go to the
yeah,
hospital, you're all set and ready to go. And I would think
right.
for me, just the anxiety of saying, okay, well, let's get this going. That's where I would be.
Yeah, you should see me on release day. I usually cry at least like twice. I'll like have a weird phone call to a family member. I'll be journaling. Like, my husband and bass player, who's my co-writer and collaborator, he's like totally fine. From one day to the next, he's just very stable. And the whole recording process is like a birth because you are bringing this new thing into the world. It has to, you can't say, hello, baby, I'm going to ride you to the bank. No, you have to say, hello, baby, I'm going to support you. I'm going to love you. I'm going to nurture you. That's all the marketing. That's all the care that goes into the press or surrounding it. And it's just like, yeah, it is like a lot like a baby. Not
You
that I've given, but I kind of feel like it could be comparable.
you mentioned that you're in this band with your husband, Dr.
Yes.
Cain Esquire. I don't know if he's more
Yeah.
doctor than lawyer or which one he is, but being in a marriage can be just challenging enough. Being in a band with someone you're married to has to be somewhat an interesting scenario also. So tell me how you guys tend to manage your way through that.
Well, we came together as bandmates first. I was in a bluegrass band playing banjo, believe it or not. And he was in a kind of classic country and Western band. And we both found that we had a lot of love for like punk rock music and 80s radio hits and Waylon Jennings and just a lot of really random things that all kind of came together. So we really connected over music first. So because we had that foundation and we started writing songs together pretty much immediately, it's almost like it's integrated into our relationship to this point where if we aren't making music together, that's where the marital problems start. We obviously have all the same problems that other couples have. We've been married 10 years now, and we definitely struggle with all the same stuff. But there's this thing of like, it's not healthy for us unless we are continually creating together. And there's always this dialogue in our relationship through songwriting that's really beautiful. But heck yeah, it can get really annoying. Hell yeah, I get offended if he is presenting a critical thing, without using the what is it called? The compliment sandwiches I've taught him, which is say the critical thing. Or no, what is it? Say the nice thing, say the critical thing, say another nice thing.
Right.
So we have to remember compliment sandwich in our marriage.
So last year, I interviewed Josie Cotton, and she was a blast. Anyway, but having talked to her and talking to her a little bit about the record company, Kitten Robot,
Yeah.
I have to say I'm not terribly surprised that she is on board with Hayley and the Crushers. There seems to be. I mean, I have to imagine you guys are right up her alley, and musically on one hand, but also visually, there's a lot of visuals to this band, not just in your album covers, but the videos. I mean, it's all brightly colored, vibrant type of stuff, and I can totally see where Josie's like, "That's my band."
I love it, and isn't Josie just, like, such an intelligent, interesting person?
She's fascinating. She is absolutely fascinating.
Like, the layers you just peel off of her. She's such a deeply complex artist, and you would wanna put her in this camp category,
Mhm.
and I respect the fact that she saw us and she didn't see a band that was all camp, because when you see colorful and you see vibrant and you see those kind of elements, you might think, "Oh, there's not much to that," and, yeah, I love that she saw something in us that was like a co-conspirator in the fact that, we're here to shake things up and make the world a little bit more eccentric and make things a little weirder. And we can do that joyfully. We can do that while we're dancing. We can do that while we're, wearing cool wigs or whatever. And it's almost like that B-52s kind of punk rock
I,
mentality.
I was
It's,
I was literally just going to ask you about that because
right?
it
There's
does.
like, it does come from like a queer space. I mean, I feel like there's a lot borrowed from that like drag queen mentality and like that idea of like punk rock in the way of like being joyfully defiant. And I think Josie's music is an example of that. It's joyfully defiant.
Yeah,
And so working with her has been incredible. And I just feel really, I hate to say validated because it's very dangerous to be validated by anyone in the music industry externally because labels can drop you, clubs can say no to you, listeners can hate your song, and it's like you have to have it from within. But I would be lying if I didn't say that having Josie's, saying that we're like, the epitome of power pop punk, or I'm not exactly sure how she said it, but like just that she was like backing us made me feel so incredibly validated, especially since I come from a background of like loving 80s pop, new wave, Debbie Harry, K Earth 101, like growing up on oldies, and like everything that Josie touches is like retro futurism. It's like a little from the past, a little from the future. It's her own blend.
yeah.
So I said it better myself. Like she is the one.
Well,
Yeah.
I think I don't know if she was the one that described it this way, but in your bio, I think on Spotify, you're described as a turbocharged glitter bomb tsunami of bold bad girl power. I mean, how can you not support a band that's that? How can you not back
Well,
that up?
I think AI wrote that. No, I'm kidding.
Well, they got it right, didn't they?
Oh
They
yeah, I'm
AI
also
learned
a
its
writer
lesson.
by trade. So I'm a writer by trade. I went to school for journalism and I'm a copywriter and marketer. So I love working with words and I never have a problem with any of that like selling myself in that way. I have such a good time with it with our publicity team at Kin Robot that does the press release. It's like my favorite part. I love it. It's so fun.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the B-52s because I actually kind of
Yeah.
thought about that. I thought about the B-52s at the same time. I'm hearing like shades of the Go-Go's as well. Both bands you could say, well, they were all visuals. Well, no, they weren't at all. If you listen to those records, you say, my God, these were really great pop records. And I get the sense that there's a lot of that within you and your husband, as you try to figure out, what kind of band you want to be. There's some influences that are coming through pretty strong, and
Yeah.
and that one definitely shows.
Yeah, the Go-Go's were definitely one of the first bands I really latched onto as like a young child. My mom had a copy of Beauty and the Beat laying around, and I was living in Hermosa Beach at the time, right by the Strand. It's like there's nothing more energizing than listening to the Go-Go's while you're skateboarding down the Strand with your wiener dog, which was like my childhood, and going down to Mickey's liquor store and picking up, newspaper for my mom and getting myself bubble gum. And like when I think about what influenced me the most as a child, it was like that was that K Earth 101 oldies radio, and then just the stuff my mom had laying around. And it was a lot of weird stuff. There was like the Tom Tom Club and there was Elvis Costello.
Hmm.
I think the main thing that I would say is it was all melodic, and I think if melody finds you, if you're that one of those people that's just into like songwriting and into writing those wormy hooks like the Go-Go's, it's just gonna find you and you're gonna have your whole life like just chasing that next like great melody. And the Go-Go's are such a great example of a band that got so much crap and whatever, but they just got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They were like the first female group to get to the number one on the Hot 100 whatever Billboard chart with their album Self-Written. a lot of them self-taught. It's like, heck yeah, to be in that category with them, or even to just have them as a strong reference, I just feel like, yeah, they're my sisters. I got to actually interview Kathy Valentine for Bust Magazine
Oh.
not too long ago. And at the end of the interview, she said, "Hey, Hayley, good luck with your little band." She didn't say it like in a mean way, but it was very like, good luck with your project too, you know?
I interviewed Gina Schock last year, and I it was the interview was hilarious because at the time I'm talking to her, there's this windstorm that's going on outside her house, and
Yeah.
shit is blowing up all over the place, and we had to interrupt it a couple of times, and I just like, her her fence is falling over, her refrigerator that's in her garage is that's being blown away, but she insisted upon finishing the
Yeah.
interview. It's like it was if it were me, I probably would have said, "Hey, could we maybe postpone the remainder of this?" But
I like that.
she was so
Yeah.
nice.
That could be an analogy for the Go-Go's story.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
they just kept going with it, like, through illness and through drug addiction and through all the crap they got from men in the industry. It's like they just went for it and they kept going, and, like, they are such a huge inspiration for me.
You know,
Huge.
I've read other interviews with you. I've seen a couple of I listened to a couple of podcast interviews that you've done. And one of the things that comes through very clear, and you brought that up a second ago, is that you do have a very strong appreciation for punk, alternative, indie music, however you want to describe it. And what's interesting is you have this appreciation for not only the music but the history, but more importantly, maybe the diversity of it, because punk is just simply not just one thing. It's a confluence of different genres that come together. You talk about your mom, having those records. Does that where punk comes from you, from kind of growing up with it, or was it something else that presented itself to you?
Ironically, no, and my mom grew up in or went to school at NYU in the 1970s, late 70s, and she said she never went to CBGB. She said she saw Joey Ramone all over the place, so she's not really my punk influence, more of just like that melodic hook, but, it was more my guitar teachers.
Mm,
I've had several guitar teachers. I started playing guitar when I was maybe, like, 12, and starting out with, like, all the cheesy stuff, like Smoke on the Water and whatnot. But I had this really great guitar teacher, who is so incredibly cool, and he gave me, like, such a breadth of knowledge. He would give me, like, all sorts of weird stuff. Like, he'd give me, like, a cassette of, like, James Brown, like, there'd be, like, a funk thing, and then he would give me, Stray Cats and X. He
mm.
introduced me to X for the first time, Los Angeles, which I still to this day play a Sparkle Gretsch guitar because of Billy Zoom, because of his playing. He gave me the Clash, my first Clash. And then, just from there, just going off in different directions. I think growing up in a post-punk, like not post-punk the genre, but like punk was done in the sense that it wasn't that culturally relevant. Like I mean, the Green Days of the world were still happening, but I think like coming into the world when there was LimeWire and there was downloading illegal music everywhere and like torrents, it was kind of cool because it kind of made it so you didn't have to stick to one subculture. It wasn't like I was defining my entire life by it. So one day I could listen to Operation Ivy or look out record stuff from the Bay Area, and I could like find all that weird stuff online. And the next day I could be listening to the Sex Pistols, and it was all just like this wonderful collage. And I think that as music has gone even more into streaming, the kids today have that tenfold, to the point where if they just want to go discover amazing music from the 1970s or 80s or 90s or whatever, they can just go do that. And I
Yeah.
think it's fantastic. I don't love the streaming model, but I do love this idea of like, I was able to patchwork together my punk rock story. And I those references are they're like very diverse, like you said.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Well, I think it's interesting that how people are influenced by certain bands, especially older bands. I mean, you talk about X. I mean, just an incredible band that was labeled punk, but it's not really a punk band at all. I mean, it's kind of there's American roots music in there, there's blues in there, there's a little bit of country, and then it's with a punk rock sensibility about it. It's fascinating to me how people who are younger than me have absorbed that, because I mean that's the stuff that I grew up. I mean that's the stuff that we were cranking up in college, and that was we actually had to work to discover music. We actually had to do And we
Right.
needed money to discover music too. That was the other thing. But
Right.
yeah, but
Well, it
today,
makes sense. Like, I can see why there would be those factions too, because you'd be like, I worked so hard to like curate my record collection. I had to go and see what imports were at the record store. I get that. And I
yeah.
respect that. But I'm that old millennial that's telling the Gen Z kids, I had to download one song at a time, and there was file sharing, and my computer had tons of bugs and pop-up ads all the time because I had to go and find that one Blitz record. And so I totally get what you're saying. And we should always give respect to the generations before us that literally like paved the way, and like what you experienced, and all the music that you were listening to when you were in that frame of mind and stuff, that's just as relevant today as it was then, just coming from a different source.
Yeah. One of the really interesting things about the new EP is that it was produced by Paul Ressler, who
Yeah.
formerly the Screamers, but I mean, you look at the damn guy's resume, it's ridiculous. I mean, everything from Black Flag and Nina Hagen and the Dead Kennedys and Mike Watt and TSO. I mean, you can go on forever about what that guy has accomplished. Tell me about working with a guy like that. I mean, what do you learn from him? I mean, I imagine it must be either endless or it's just like you have to work real hard to get it out of him. But what was that experience like with you guys?
Well, I remember like at first there was a lot of like you said, like you were like, this could be really interesting and really amazing, or it could go in a lot of different ways. And when we first came into that studio, I remember like one of the first recording sessions, it was like, oh yeah, and that bass, or that amp was used for in a Black Flag. And there's a poster on the wall from like the Mask nightclub, and it's got all these incredible bands on it, and the Germs are on there. And and you're just looking around and you're just like, what the actual heck? Like, how did I get into this time warp with this legendary producer who always thinks outside the box? Like, how did this happen exactly? But all I can say is I feel like I kind of manifested it, because I wrote in my journal, like, I want to find a producer that cares enough, that actually wants to tell you when you suck and wants to tell you when you can do better. And I think Paul, he's so sensitive and so cool. Like, he'll come into the vocal booth and look at your lyrics that you're reading from and go, what does that mean exactly? Can you tell me, like, what does that
Hmm.
verse mean? He actually cares to the point where he wants to know what the full emotional range of the song is. And that is not something I necessarily expected from somebody who's known as like a legendary punk rock producer, but he is so incredibly intelligent. He's so interested in actually like prog rock
Mm.
and the Beatles and classics. And actually, he's of the baby boomer generation, which it couldn't like compute in my mind. It's like punk rock baby boomers, but these are the first generation of punk rockers that created the whole thing. And it never ceases to bog my mind when I work with him, because I'm just like, you're crazy. Whatever was going on in the Kool-Aid back then is like what created all these modern incarnations of punk. So it's kind of amazing, but he's just really kind, really sensitive, really stinking smart.
Yeah.
He comes from a really smart family. His sister Kira, who played in Black Flag, is a sound designer sound engineer for like big movies. And it's incredible. It's like, he's just a very kind, sensitive, artistic soul.
I think
Great guy.
I
Loves
think
corgis.
I think the best producers are not the ones that want to do just one thing. Like they may do one thing because that's what they get hired to do, but
Yeah.
they're very aware of how other things have been recorded that may not necessarily be something that they would be familiar with. You talk about like the Beatles and other bands. There are things to learn from all of that. And if you're really a good producer who wants to get better at your craft, understanding what has come before you is actually a very valuable
Yeah.
thing to bring to the table.
Yeah. And it's funny because in some ways we've kind of pushed him into the pop route more than I think he was comfortable going. For instance, I really like doubling my vocals a lot. I think it creates a really fun, punchy sound. And like, he's not that into it. And he would tell me sometimes, like, if you're not going to double vocals on this part, it's going to feel more real. It's going to feel like you're actually singing to the audience. Like, you're going to actually get that emotion. And that's just stuff that like I realize, oh, I come from maybe a little bit more of this like pop mentality, loving all the radio stuff that I love from like the 50s and 60s and 70s. It's like he's kind of like in some weird ways like pulling me back. Like, even though he's in this beautiful studio and he's so talented, he's like, no, like, do another thing he does is he says, sing the whole song. Don't just sing parts at a time. A lot of times you can Frankenstein together a track. he wants to hear the whole thing, and then he'll just be like, well, these were the best verses that you did, and he'll kind of figure it out. But he wants you to do the whole thing, go through the whole journey with the song. And like those kind of things they do actually matter in the music. They do. And so I don't know, you really can't pay someone to give a crap about your music. I've realized like you either they really care or they don't. And
Yeah.
money has nothing to do with it. It's really like the person, and he cares more than anyone I've ever met about like getting the artist's idea out. And whether that he's working with TSOL, just put out a great TSOL record, which was like, whoa, where did that come from? Holy cow. Or working with Josie, or working with someone like Richie Ramone or whoever. It's like he really, really cares. He's like on that journey with you. And I think that's also like what you need for a good producer. He's like he's an accomplice. He's in this, he's in the car with you. And it's so incredibly amazing. I'm very grateful to have someone like that who has that breadth of knowledge and understands punk.
It's also good that you guys, this is not your first time in the studio. You've released 4 albums before this, and to have that comparison to say, well, we like this in a producer, but this works better for us. I mean, it sounds like, this is kind of what you got out of him, that you really did kind of, as I said in the beginning, you have stepped up your game on this EP, and it sounds like that Paul is responsible for at least a good deal of that.
Yeah, I mean, so Modern Adult Kicks, our last album, he recorded as well. So I feel like this new EP is a step, it's like a step in that world, in that realm that he's helped create with us. And part of that also is his keyboard skills. He integrates a lot of keyboards and things into the music, which I love. He also does backing vocals, which is incredible. He adds, he's very timid about adding those things. And I just say, please, like, we want that Phil Spector wall of sound. And he sometimes gets a little annoyed because he's like, well, that's just like radio crap. Like, you don't want Phil Spector. And I'm like, no, like we want all the keyboards, all the glockenspiel, all the backing vocals. And I think on this EP, we did pare it back quite a bit, but it's just, like I said, it's a pairing of like his amazing qualities, and then like us just kind of wild westing it. I mean, I guess wild easting it, east coasting it out here in Detroit, going, we need to record something. We got to get some stuff down. We can't necessarily fly to LA every week. So how are we going to do this and make it work? And somehow it kind of came together. But yeah, I mean, having someone like Paul, it's never going to be a bad thing.
Yeah,
Like,
it's true. You've mentioned a couple times that you have relocated from California to is it outside Detroit? I think. Detroit.
We're in Detroit. I mean, yeah, we're like on the border of Detroit and Hamtramck, but we're like 10 minutes from downtown. We're technically in Detroit.
So what was the? I mean, that had to be somewhat of a bit of a culture shock. I mean, you tell me about the decision to relocate.
I mean, it was a long time coming. We were living in a town called San Luis Obispo, California. I don't know if you're familiar with
Hmm.
the central coast of California, Santa Barbara, white wine, vineyards. You think about it, it's like white linen suits. I mean, 10 years ago when we were both living there, my husband, Dr. Cain Esquire, Reed Cain, came from Oakland to the Central Coast. I came from LA to Central Coast. It was a great place to sort of create music and be in this like kind of beautiful rural coastal environment. But over the past 10 years, it has become very, very expensive and very, very fancy. All the artists were pushed out. And we looked around between people having children and leaving the scene, or people, can't afford to live there. We're like, we're just the last bastions on the Central Coast. It really felt lonely. And going on tour in the Midwest, we were so enchanted and like so just amazed by the people, the friendliness, the warmth, that people would shake your hand and say, thank you for coming to my town. I want to buy your merch. Thank you for coming. Being exotic in a place where you don't belong is actually like my number one tip for bands. Like, go where you're exotic. Be the California band, playing in Ohio. So that was part of the decision. The other part was looking around Detroit and seeing this amazing energy of like can-do spirit, people picking up the pieces, running with it. I mean, we can take no credit for that. I mean, Detroit's been coming up for years now, and it's incredible. The downtown is like world class. It's a beautiful city, but there's still so much opportunity here that is not available for people that are living in California.
Right.
And that's just an economic thing. And it's also, like going from the ground up is always going to produce a lot more diversity and interesting stuff. And so being in that environment and having those people to play off of and fellow artists that were like, oh my God, we're here on a Thursday night and we're inspired by this local band. And it's like feeling that energy is so cool.
Yeah.
It's definitely something we needed. So we just had to get out of our bubble.
Well,
you know?
admittedly, there's something about the folks that live around the Great Lakes, which is completely different than any other part of the country. Totally. I lived in Milwaukee for like 11 years, and so I
Oh,
it was like, I came from the Boston area. Like, this is like a totally different planet than what I was
totally.
used to, and I loved it.
Yeah, there's the kindness and the warmth of the people, and then there's this opportunity mixed with that. And some would say like, well, there's some pieces missing here and there. And yes, there is, like, the infrastructure here isn't as great. We definitely run into some issues. We don't live in like the best neighborhood. We love our neighborhood, but it's like, we don't always, like, sometimes the power goes out for a while, and that's just how it is. And like, I think it's actually been good for us to remember that this is how most people in the country are living. Like, when you're on the West Coast, it's like, I mean, it's just like living in Disneyland. I mean, it really does feel that way. And it's been massively humbling to the point where, like, we really do feel like we were kind of bratty and like needed that, needed to see like this is not really sustainable to, like, buy a carton of strawberries, and which are supposedly grown on the central coast of California, but they're like $25 for some reason. We like that we can come here and have lunch for $10 and go get a coney dog, and every walk of life is sitting there, and everybody is sort of like on this not equal playing field, but certainly like we're all kind of like that, like we're all Detroiters and we're all trying to like make Detroit cool. And I think that's just very, very different than the vibe on the coasts when you're like in New York or California.
Hmm.
So that's just kind of how we feel about it. And we love New York, we love California, or we love Los Angeles. But yeah, it's nice to be like an exotic fish in the tank,
I bet.
because we're so different.
Yeah, but that's cool because I mean that's the kind of place where you're more
Yeah.
likely to be accepted or not rejected because you're one thing or another. It's a good place to settle, to be honest.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
see. I mean, I don't know what we're gonna do, but it's lovely also that we can tour so easily. So that's been really nice. And we've been playing some fun festivals. Just did New York recently, and just the idea that we could, fly to New York in an hour and a half is so great.
yeah.
It's so awesome.
I was going to ask you
You-
about some of the live performances because I've seen a few videos on YouTube of you guys playing live, and it's really really good. But you only have like a handful of dates on the calendar now, as far as I can tell. Are you looking to add
Yeah.
more once the EP gets released, or what? I mean, what is the plan moving forward?
If someone wants to book us, we do all our booking ourselves. And I think that since 2020 and COVID, there's been quite this change, especially for the smaller to mid-tier bands. Not to, I mean, the middle class bands are like, they don't even exist anymore. And then there's these, super crazy national names that are doing fine and they can do everything. So we've just been paring back dates to things that we feel are going to be successful on both ends. And if we can find a way to continue to tour in the way that we did in 2018, 2017,
Hmm.
heck yeah, we'd love to do that. But it kind of feels like it's a different animal. So we're a little cautious right now, and just like, we are still like growing roots in this area. So heck yeah, I'd love to do more shows, but we'll see. And I just put this out there as an intention, like anybody who wants to talk to us about booking, we love to play like these 200 seaters. Like, we love to play these like small intimate places where we get to meet people, and when we're at the merch table shaking hands, like, we love that. So if we can do more of that, we'd be over the moon.
Well, I'm glad you decided to use this podcast to manifest things. That's I don't always get that here, so but that's fun. That's good.
Yeah, and I'm just being real. I mean, I think a lot of bands would not want to admit that, like, maybe, but it's a very interesting time for live shows and making it make sense. We have a great band, but they're our band, but they're also like they're our guys that we want to take care of our guys. We want to make sure everybody gets a hotel room. Everybody gets, it's so much more than just like picking a date on the calendar, as you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, we want to get out there more, but like we're putting it out there. If you want to help us, please like hit me up on all the social media.
Hayley, this has been a blast. I'm so happy to have the time with you today. Like I said, the EP is great. I hope there's more music down the road. I don't know if you guys are working on that yet or even planning that yet, but I hope there's more to come.
There is. Unsubscribe from the Underground is coming out September. Is it 10th? I'm gonna get it wrong now.
It's something.
September 10th.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's so funny. Okay. September 10th. Unsubscribe from the Underground. And the thing that's coming after that will be definitely a surprise. So get ready for that. And I'll just give one hint.
Yes.
Surf's up, dude. That's it. That's my hint.
Okay. All right. I'll hold you to that until I find out what the hell you're talking about. Hayley, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate the time today. Best of luck.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions. Take care. Appreciate you.
Take care now. Bye-bye. The new Hayley and the Crushers EP is called Unsubscribe from the Underground. It's set to be released on September 10th on Kitty Robot Records, and it is an absolute blast. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like it, share it, review it, follow along on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates on what's coming up on future episodes. You can also email me at backs@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support, and thanks to you for listening to Baxy's Musical Podcast.